Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics like wealth creation strategies, investment principles, creating passive income, paying off your debt faster, and much, much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the 360 Money Matters podcast. I'm Billy and I'm joined by my co-host
Andrew. Bills, we are back again for another podcast.
We are back again, Andrew, and this one is a really juicy one and I'm excited to get stuck into this one. But before we do that, we should tell our viewers and our listeners that you are departing our shores
That's where you're going
for a
with
short period of time. And unfortunately, you're not going to be able to grace them with your presence, both in your voice and your image, for the next 4 weeks. So we are going to have another person on the podcast to help in your absence. Big shoes to fill. But Andrew, tell us what's going on. Where are you going?
Yeah, I am off to the Greek islands. So excited and happy to be escaping the winter that is Melbourne at the moment. So really looking forward to getting some sunshine, getting some relaxation in, and it means that I'll come back with a huge amount of enthusiasm once I'm relaxed and a little bit more tanned.
That's right. And look, I've been thinking about this. I'm sure the microphone can fit in the suitcase, right? So
look, with a 10-month-old, it's just baggage allowance, right? These bloody airlines and their baggage, they're not letting you take as much over. So, we're going to have to, take a little bit of a break from the podcast. And in my shoes is going to be Pat, who'll be stepping in. He's one of the other partners here at 360 Financial, one of the other financial advisors as well. So he'll be taking my place and hopefully not replacing me. I mean, I hope there's no,
We'll wait and see, Andrew. Who knows? Maybe if the listeners and the viewers go up, then it might be time to substitute you out. We'll wait and see.
Yeah, exactly right.
But anyway, enough about your holiday because I'm getting jealous here. So let's kick it off. We're actually talking about a client scenario. So Andrew, lead us in because I reckon there's a whole heap of value in this one, and this really resonates with me because I'm right into the thick of this in terms of my life stage and our family. But tell us what we're...
So look, today running through a scenario with a particular client, they had a much broader needs or much broader scope of advice in their financial planning. What we're going to be focusing on is one aspect of their goals because, when you're talking about a much larger financial plan, you're probably talking about hours worth of conversation to really flush that through and detail the strategy. So we're talking about one particular goal that they had and really, flushing that through what went through our decision-making process, how we went through it with the client, and ultimately what the end result and the end strategy was. So this particular client, they were a young family, they had a 12-year-old child, and they had an intention or one of their particular goals was to have an amount of money that they could gift to the child once they're employed in full-time work, so that they could help them fund a deposit on the house. That was the ultimate, goal in one of the goals in the overarching strategy that we were trying to solve for.
Yeah, and just on that, because it goes slightly deeper. So it was the objective is to get a lump sum amount of money, and we'll demonstrate that in terms of what the numbers look like and what the strategy was. But the theory for the parents was, one, it's difficult enough to get a deposit up first and foremost. But the other intention was that, and I don't know what it was like for you, Andrew, when you were that age, when you first started working, but it's very tempting to blow all of your money, especially when you're first in the workforce, you're first earning, a full wage, right?
Yep.
So the intention from the parents' perspective, which was quite clever, is to try and put some discipline around that by getting their child into a property so they have a mortgage to service. Now, the child's still living... The intention is that the child will still be living at home with mum and dad. They'll be, 22 because we worked off a 10-year time frame. They'll buy a property at the age of 22. Mum and dad will fund the deposit. You'll have the renter that's in the investment helping to service the mortgage. But from the child's perspective, who will be an adult at that point in time, they're going to have to use a portion of their income to be able to service the mortgage as well too. So
Yeah, I
really
think the
clever.
words that they used were get them in debt as quickly as possible.
That's exactly the words that they used, and look, I think theoretically, I think it makes so much sense, and I kind of look back at the amount of money that I spent on every weekend out for half a decade probably, looking at that, and if that was put to a productive use, then I probably would be in a different financial position at the moment, but good memories.
Yeah, and look, I think it's a great strategy, and I think it's something that really resonated with with this family, and it was something that they wanted to do. And so for us, what was what we were trying to achieve was, okay, what's the best strategy to get there? What's going to yield the greatest result? And first and foremost, what's the end goal? Like, what are we trying to get to? Which naturally takes some conversation, takes some coaching, takes some discussion to actually try and flush that out. They weren't as specific around exactly what they wanted to get to, and with a bit of discussion and with some projection as to what house prices were going to be like at that stage, what level of deposit you were going to need.
Yeah.
We eventually settled on a lump sum amount of money of what 250,000 is what we're talking about.
Yeah, correct. So 250,000 in 10 years' time is the number. So we had the time frame, we had the end goal, and it was just a matter of working through a few different strategies, scenarios, trade-offs. One of the things, as an example of that, was that the family wanted the money to be liquid.
Yep.
So in case something changed in their circumstances, they didn't want an investment where they put money in to grow towards that $250,000 investment target. They actually wanted flexibility just in case there was any change in circumstance, which I think is a really prudent thing to do.
Yep.
But they wanted to make sure that if they needed to, they could get their hands on that money.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, they were talking about potentially, if they needed to pay for university fees, or if they decided to, utilize that money for paying for HECS, they wanted to have the option. It wasn't the original intention of what we were doing, but the option to be able to adjust if it was going to be utilized for something like that as well.
Yep. So Andrew, what about some of the other strategies that we had discounted as part of this approach?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point to look at, because it's really easy to say, all right, this is what they want to achieve, this is what we recommended, great, satisfies it, that's nice and easy. What's another big thing in it is, what are some of the things we considered, but we just figured that's not going to be the right approach to ultimately get there based off their circumstances and their goals. And the first one, which we spoke about, we flushed through and ultimately decided not to go down that route, was the parents actually purchasing an investment property now, and utilizing either the growth on the property. So there were two options in that strategy, and that's purchase an investment property now. That property will hopefully continue to increase in value, and then sell that property in 10 years' time and utilize those funds to give to the child, or even purchase the property that the child will ultimately, say, early inherit, and then gift them that asset in 10 years' time and effectively roll over the debt onto the child. So whatever's remaining in terms of the mortgage, pass that onto the child, and they inherit the asset and inherit the debt. We ultimately discounted property from the equation for a few different things. One, if they were transferring the property to the child, the stamp duty implications associated with it. If they were purchasing the property, so the amount of money that they would need to fund up front as a deposit was another big sort of stumbling block for that strategy. And the other thing was the inflexibility of it. Once you're on the property journey, once you've paid your stamp duty, once you've paid your deposit, it's a lot harder to adjust your strategy, and you can't pause contributions, take a portion of the assets out. So it was a really inflexible strategy. And putting all of those things together, we ultimately decided that wasn't going to be the right approach for what they were ultimately wanting to achieve.
Yeah.
Bill's next strategy that they were talking through.
One of the other things that we looked at and ultimately discounted is looking at, and this strategy would work, by the way, and achieve what they wanted to achieve, but probably not to the optimal position that we've eventually ended up landing on, but buying a parcel of managed funds and shares. So you get all of the benefits associated with having a diversified portfolio, being able to get access to some Australian shares with the franking credit system benefit that we've got, with the dividends that Australian shares do pay out on the right types of shares. Managed funds, being able to get access to high quality assets through professional investment managers. So that would have ticked the box ordinarily. But the reason why we discounted that is because of the tax consequences eventually down the track when the parents would dispose of that in order to realise it as the money to get the deposit up. So really for us, it was more so around what are the tax consequences going to be like. And once again, without getting into too much detail, but it would be in the name of the parents. And because of their income position, we thought that, hey, there's a better way of doing this, simply because they were decent income earners, so they were paying a fairly high marginal tax rate. So we ultimately discounted that simply from a taxation perspective, in terms of the eventual sale. But above and beyond that, we also discounted it too because of the income as well too. So we were trying not to get any additional income added to the parents' assessable income, because it would mean them paying more tax.
Yep, exactly right. So they hold, say, a managed fund or a share. As dividends gets paid, even though it's eventually going to be for the child, the parents were ultimately needing to also fund the tax bill that was associated with it each and every single year as well.
That's it. Yep.
Third one.
Yep.
Simple, easy, probably the first thing that springs to mind when people are considering this type of strategy, and that was just saving account. Get a savings account, put an amount of money into it. That's going to build up, that's going to give them a deposit, and that's going to, satisfy the liquidity needs. There's no requirement around, or there's no issues in terms of selling out, putting additional lump sums in, whatever it is, was as flexible as you could get. But quite simply, it was just purely, risk is zero, or as close to zero as you can possibly be.
Yep.
But your exposure to growth was also pretty much as close to zero as you could possibly be. So you're not getting any additional dividends, you're not getting any additional capital growth. You've got the time frame of 10 years for investment, and so the net result in terms of the amount of money that you would have at the end of the day would be significantly less if you look at what's happened in markets previously, and if those funds were invested. So ticked a lot of the boxes, but given where they were at, given the time frame, again, there's a better option out there, which builds what was the eventual strategy that we landed on after we sort of discounted all of those.
Yeah, so just on that, just with the discounting of the savings account, because you could almost say, what was the point in even considering that? But from our perspective, from an advice point of view, we're always looking for how can we achieve a particular goal with the least amount of risk as possible.
Yeah.
So if we had a longer time frame with the online savings rates or term deposits or whatever it would be, we would still get to that target. It would just take longer. And in this instance, they had a specific time frame of 10 years. Just assuming that the child will finish school at 18, do 3 or 4 years of uni and start earning a full-time salary at age 22. So that's the reason why we sort of did it from there. But a bit more of our thinking around, hey, how do we look at risk, and how does it formulate or come into the thinking when we're formulating advice? So we always look at that, because we're trying to minimize the risk as best as we can, because that's just prudent from an advice perspective. But where we ended up landing, we landed on a particular product. We've spoken about it before, an investment bond.
Yep.
So there are some complexities around it that we will go through shortly in a minute. But what it looked like is fairly simplistic from a cash flow perspective. It was a small initial deposit of $5,000. And then literally it was 100% at $300 per week invested over the period of a 10-year time frame. We assumed average market rate of return of just over 7% with this, and that got us to the $250,000 mark in 10 years' time. So just to put it out there and to put it into context, and I don't want to sort of sound like a $300 per week, a lot of money or a little, it's different for everybody's circumstances. But $300 a week, 10-year period, the initial lump sum, it's a pretty healthy sacrifice, I think, to achieve. And I'll explain why I'm going down this path. But it's a pretty healthy sacrifice to make to achieve such a big goal. And the reason why I say it in those terms is because when we presented the strategy to these parents, they were almost in tears that, hey, they could see it. Like, this is it. This is, and it's not as simple and as black and white. I mean, obviously markets need to perform, and as part of our review process, we'll make sure that we're on track. And if not, we'll change course and change tact. But the emotional response around this is about how achievable and attainable it was for them. In terms of me and, how satisfying it was. It was a pretty humbling moment, I must say.
So the earlier you start, the more you can plan for something, the bigger the result is at the end of the day.
Mate, Warren Buffett, I think one of his famous quotes.
It's been a few episodes since you've quoted Warren Buffett.
That's what I kind of figured, right? But the eighth wonder of the world is compounding interest. So perfect example and illustration in terms of the numbers that sit behind this. In terms of some of the flexibility around the actual recommendation itself, there's flexibility in terms of the investment options that we chose from. We're not going to get into what investment options that we chose in this particular example, but there is flexibility in that particular product to help achieve that result.
Yep. One of the downsides to this strategy, and one of the things that we sort of had to talk through was there was some flexibility with withdrawals because we selected a particular product, and again, obviously don't want to give personal advice away, so I'm not going to go into what the product was, but we also had some flexibility to pull money out, which did give them flexibility should their position or should their circumstances change in the future. The thing that we could not solve for and that we needed to accept as a risk was the ability to contribute. So this particular product has a 125% rule with regards to contributions. So what that means is, let's say in year one you contribute $1,000. In year two, the maximum amount that you can contribute, so you can do less, but the maximum amount that you can contribute is 125% of that. So $1,250 in year two. In year three, it's 125% of the previous year. So 1,250 times by 125%. Now, there's a limitation on how much you can contribute, and in what we were trying to achieve and in what we were doing with the overall strategy, it wasn't as big of a consideration because they wanted to stick to that $100 a week, and that was going to help satisfy their goal. The consideration was that if in 1 year they need to reduce their contributions due to some cash flow pressure or whatnot, because you just don't know what the future is going to hold, it's going to limit their ability in the subsequent year to top it back up.
So if 125% of the previous year's contribution.
Yeah, so let's say in year three you contribute zero. Well, then in year four you're capped out because 125% of zero is zero. So it does mean that you need to make sure that there's some certainty in income. And a broader part of this strategy was also making sure that they had adequate insurances in place so that if there was something that impacted their income, they could continue to fund it. So as a broader part of the strategy, certainty of income was a big consideration, but that was something that we needed to talk through and discuss with the client as to whether they were comfortable in accepting the downside, because in any investment there's benefits, but there's also detriments. And so making sure that you're aware of what those detriments are and that can be managed is another important aspect of it as well.
Yep. We spoke a bit about the tax considerations as well too. So in terms of this particular product, the tax rate is capped at 30% as a maximum. Depending on the operation of the product, depending on the investment options, that can come down in certain circumstances. But the key thing here is that it's a tax-paid investment. So it doesn't impact, or it wouldn't impact, the parent's tax return or their assessable income, which was a huge consideration for them as well too. So essentially, over time, over the years, when you withdraw, it doesn't form part of your assessable income. You don't get it added to your tax return. So that was very beneficial and very attractive for the clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And then last but not least, which is the big kicker in all of this, and kind of what tipped it over the edge in between, sort of comparing it with just a managed fund and a share portfolio that's sort of individually owned, was the capital gains implications. So you hold this product for 10 years or more, nil capital gains on withdrawals.
Say that again, Andrew.
I know, I glossed over that one pretty quickly. Zero tax on withdrawals after the asset is completely sold down. So they had the ability to hold an asset, make a significant amount of capital growth over the course of 10 years. And then after that 10-year period is over, so if you hold it for 10 years or more, you pay zero tax on capital gains. So there's no capital gain on the asset.
Suffice to say, we had some very excited clients.
Yes, exactly right.
Andrew, well said, well summarised. I reckon that was an absolute ripper, because that scenario, I think, is really relevant, especially in today's market, in terms of housing costs and knowing how difficult it is to get a deposit up. And a lot of people that we deal with, young families, this would definitely resonate. We're both in that position, and this is definitely something that people resonate with, because it's something as a parent that you worry about.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, it's taken us, where are we at? We're probably, 20, 25 minutes through. This is one aspect of, an overall strategy. And so there's other aspects that will also come into this when you're building your longer term financial plan. So whether it's with us here at 360 Financial, or whether it's even with, other financial advisors, we're really big proponents on people receiving advice, not only just, in the value of the advice that you get off the back end of it, but to help bring these ideas that you may not have thought about, that you may not have considered, to the forefront now, so that the longer you have to plan for it, the longer you have to, make a strategy towards something, the better off that you're ultimately going to be at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And on that note, to our viewers and our listeners, thank you for your time and attention. Like and subscribe as always.
No, don't like and subscribe. Not for the next 4 weeks. If our likes and subscribe shoot up, or Pat joins the podcast, then I'm off and you lose me. So do not like and subscribe until you see me back again on the podcast.
And especially share it with your family and friends over that period of time as well too, so we can really show Andrew up. But Andrew, safe travels, enjoy. We're looking forward to hearing all about it when you get back.
Thanks very much, Bills. I am looking forward to it. Can't wait. And I'll be thinking of you while I am sipping on a cocktail on the beach.
I'm sure you will be. We'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks. See you later.
Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we talked about, or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au.
Just a reminder to our listeners that the information contained in this podcast is general in nature, and it is not intended as personal recommendations for the audience. Please consider whether the information suits your circumstances before acting on it. This information is provided by Billy Amaritis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Proprietary Limited, authorised representatives and credit representatives of AMP Financial Planning.